So good morning, and while folks are still joining us, I want to welcome you to our UpSkill Works Forum series, where we engage business and community leaders, policymakers, and leading thinkers on the key workforce issues our region and our nation confront. I'm Peter Beard, and I lead the Greater Houston Partnership's UpSkill Houston initiative that partners and mobilizes employers, educational leadership, and community-based organization to strengthen the talent pipeline in our region's employers need and to help Houstonians connect to good jobs that increased opportunity and mobility. Before we get to our guest, I want to do several things. First, as we enter the holiday season, I'd like to offer a couple quick reminders as it relates to the pandemic. And second, I'll review a couple housekeeping details and acknowledge the underwriters of the UpSkill Works Forum series. As you know, we're entering this holiday season and we're seeing rises in case counts. And we can do a lot to ensure that our families and we are all safe for the holiday season. There are just 6 things we already know that can help Houston and all of our residents stay safe and healthy. Get your flu shot, wear masks, social distance, avoid congregate settings, gather outdoors, and wash your hands. And now for those housekeeping details. All attendees are muted and your video is turned off for the entirety of the webinar. Please do not use the chat function for questions and answers. This will not be moderated for questions. The chat function should be used to connect with our production team if you're having any issues. If you have questions for Tamar, you should use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. This will be moderated and I'll be watching it as we go through the session today. I'd like to acknowledge the sponsors of the 2020 UpSkill Works Forum series. The Greater Houston Partnership and UpSkill Houston would like to thank our gold level sponsors, Houston Community College, the Merrick family of companies, Texas Mutual Insurance, and Winstead PC. Our silver level sponsors are Accenture, AT&T, CenterPoint Energy, HCA Houston Healthcare, Lone Star College, San Jacinto College, and Western Governors University, Texas. And I want to thank all of our sponsors for your support of UpSkill Houston's work. And I'd now like to introduce Mark Guthrie, who serves as a shareholder at Winstead PC, where he practices law focused on construction-related transactions and disputes and arbitration of complex commercial cases. In addition, and more importantly, Mark serves as the chair of the Gulf Coast Workforce Board, serving individuals and employers across a 13-county region. Mark will be introducing today's session, our guest. Welcome, Mark, and thank you to Winstead for its leadership in this region. We also appreciate your sponsorship of this important series.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning, everyone. Winstead is very proud to partner with UpSkill Houston and support these virtual forum sessions on important workforce topics in the Houston region. Those of you who know me know that that is a topic very near and dear to my heart. Today we will discuss some very interesting findings of a report on the role of community colleges can play in workforce and skills development. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated and accentuated a change already underway in education and is changing the nature of work by disrupting career pathways into good careers, particularly for middle skill workers. There's a really good article in the Houston Chronicle this morning on that topic. Recently, Opportunity America released a report, The Indispensable Institution, Reimagining Community College, which provides important insights on how community colleges can live up to their potential as a premier provider of career-focused education and training. The report also suggests there are opportunities for workforce boards and community colleges to deepen their partnerships to better serve individuals and employers. We are especially fortunate to have with us today Tamar Jacoby, President and CEO of Opportunity America, which authored the report. Tamar has a very diverse and distinguished background, and we are very fortunate to have her with us today. She leads Opportunity America, a Washington think tank and policy shop, which promotes economic mobility, work, skills, careers, ownership, and entrepreneurship for poor and working Americans. Prior to joining Opportunity America, Tamar was a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. She is a former journalist, as a senior writer and justice editor at Newsweek, and before that, the deputy editor of the New York Times op-ed page. Tamar also has deep experience in immigration and is passionate about advancing immigration reform that works for all Americans, employers, workers, and citizens. Welcome, Tamar. This is sure to be a great and insightful conversation. I'm now turning it back over to Peter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was so generous. You're on mute.
Thanks, Mark. We appreciate the support of Winstead and its leaders like you that are improving the workforce in Houston. I also appreciate the leadership you provide on UpSkill Houston's executive committee. So once again, thank you. And Tamar, I'll echo Mark's thanks for taking the time today to join us here in Houston. So let's jump into our conversation. And I want to remind our audience that we'll respond to questions viewers submit via the Q&A function. And I'm going to be monitoring that chat and sharing timely questions with Tamar as we go along. So as you have questions for Tamar, please feel free to submit them. Let's start with a really easy softball question. Tell us about the mission and the work of Opportunity America. And we touched on it with your background, but I know you all have been doing some really, really great work.
Well, you're much too kind, Peter. And by the way, the thanks all go the other way. Thank you for this opportunity. It's great to have a chance to be with you and to talk to your audience. So Opportunity America is a research and policy shop in Washington, but we have a national scope. And we do focus on a range of issues. It's not all workforce education, but it's workforce education is kind of topic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We do a little bit of entrepreneurship, a little bit of ownership. I'm interested in immigrant entrepreneurship. But you know, it's such an exciting time for workforce. I think of it as a kind of Silicon Valley in the 1980s. You know, there's so much innovation. There's a garage on every corner. People woke up about 10 years ago. We really need to up the game around workforce education and connecting people with careers. And we are a small organization, but we see ourselves as a catalyst. You know, find the better mousetraps out there, lift up the better mousetraps, connect them with other people doing good mousetraps, and then create the space and policy.
And I agree with you. I mean, that's how I kind of got into it. As I think, as I shared yesterday, as we were talking, you know, I didn't start out in workforce. I kind of ended up in it because it's my belief that it's one of the few ways we're going to ever deal with generational poverty. So I really appreciate the work. What drew you to Opportunity America?
Yeah, well, you know, when I talk to students, I always say, don't try this at home. I was a journalist, and I made the, you know, the important leap was to go from being a journalist to a policy thinker and policy advocate. And I was really around immigration. I went to Arizona in the early 2000s to fight a ballot initiative. Well, to tell us, I was actually writing a story about the fight against a ballot initiative, anti-immigrant ballot initiative. And I was having interviews with Republicans, Democrats, business, labor, faith, and they were all against it, but they weren't talking to each other. And I said, well, I'm canceling my interviews. We're going to form a coalition. And this was the first Russell Pierce, you know, fight. And we formed a coalition. And, you know, I discovered it was much more fun, as the metaphor I used to use at the time, it's much more fun to be part of the train wreck than writing about it. We didn't win the battle, but we evened out the vote, and I kind of got the bug of policy advocacy and policy research.
So I really found the report interesting and compelling. So I want to give you the opportunity to provide the audience with an overview of the report, your advisory board, and the report's key findings. And after you do that, I'd like to delve into a couple areas that are particularly important to us. You know, this whole notion of credentials that have strong labor market value, the important role of career navigation, and I like the term you use in that space, and then really this role that's really important to us, which is this business education partnership. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you present kind of what you have in that report.
Great, thank you so much. So this is what the report's about. It's about unlocking the potential of community colleges. And the unspoken subtitle, the subtext, the question is, can community colleges step up as the nation's premier provider of workforce education? Can they step up in the COVID context as engines of economic recovery? And before we get to the solution, I always think it's useful to think a little bit about the problem. What are we solving for? Why are we even talking about this? We'll get to COVID in a minute, but the problem that was looming even before COVID, you know, what we used to call the future of work has really been steaming at us for decades. You know, the digital revolution began in the 50s. Manufacturing automation began in the 70s. Retail, Amazon launched in 1995. And of course, these changes are wonderful in some ways, not in others. That's why we call it creative destruction. But it's created the prospect of a really ominous divide between what I think of as the educational haves and the educational have-nots. And some people think of the line that divides the educational haves and have-nots as a bachelor's degree, and that's an important line, but maybe even more consequential and more distressing is the line between Americans who have any kind of post-secondary education or training and those who have no post-secondary education or training at all, nothing but a high school diploma. And if you look at this slide, you know, many people, their eyes go first to the blue that expanded, you know, the number of the percent of workers that need a college degree has doubled. But the really important number is the difference between the red in the two slides. It used to be that 2/3 of American jobs were open to people with only a high school diploma. Now 2/3 of American jobs require more than a high school diploma. There's another way of thinking about this, and you know, is that the future of work has shifted the skills demand outward. You know, it used to be that a PhD was enough. Now you need postdoc. It used to be that a bachelor's was enough. Now for most of those jobs you need a master's. And it used to be high school was enough, but now for most of those jobs you need some kind of post-secondary education or training, but not necessarily right off the bat a 4-year college degree. So the point is, we were already facing a major challenge, a historic, you know, really the challenge of our lifetime. And then along comes COVID, sharply increasing the need for immediate training, right? All those waiters and what have you thrown out of work, dramatically accelerating the future of work. I mean, we've all watched this happen. It was when, you know, what was supposed to take 10 years in the future of work happened in a week in the pandemic. And also, of course, creating a lot of uncertainty about where the economy is going and what kind of jobs to train for. So to address this challenge, and we did start before COVID, my organization convened a group of thinkers. We started before COVID. We think we became even more relevant when COVID, you know, changed the universe. This is too many words on a slide, but there are two constituencies here is kind of the important thing to know about the group. One is bold-faced name education reformers, people you've all, if you follow these issues, you've all heard of, the founder of Burning Glass, Bob Schwartz from Harvard, Joe Fuller from Harvard. That's one constituency. And on the other side are, you know, very, I would say, modest people who do workforce training at community colleges, very different kind of group, not used to being on TV, not bold-faced names at all. And we came together, we spent a year together, we met every 8 weeks or so, wrestling with the question of, really the real question we faced, the important question, we were all concerned about this educational divide, looming educational divide. The question we faced is what institution is going to be able to provide the education and training that we see so essential to bridge this divide between the haves and the have-nots. So this next slide kind of sums up our message. This is the bumper sticker version. Community colleges are an institution with great potential, but they're performing unevenly, to put it mildly. There's a lot of challenges. And in order to live up to the potential to meet looming workforce and economic needs, the institution will need, maybe not all colleges, but many, will need a serious reboot. So let's just dig into that a little bit more deeply. Let's talk about the advantages and the challenges. This is the main advantage, size and scale, where the students are. You know, when you talk about workforce, people talk about boot camps, they talk about government job training, they talk about apprenticeships. Those hardly register as bars on the left-hand side of the slide compared to community college. There's 12 million, close to 12 million people, a little fewer now, but close to 12 million people in community colleges. Many community colleges have been doing workforce education for a long time. The last decade, as Peter and I were saying, has seen a revolution, burgeoning innovation at many community colleges. And they have a hidden asset that I'm going to talk about in a minute, which is this kind of lighter red part of the bar over here, the non-credit division, that can make them surprisingly nimble and responsive to the labor market. There are plenty of challenges. I don't have a slide on that. It's sort of depressing, but very poor, stubbornly poor graduation rates, even worse transfer rates, starved for resources. That's going to get worse in coming years. And arguably the biggest problem at at many community colleges, not all, but many, is they're confused about their mission. They're not sure if they're junior college on one hand or a vocational school on the other. They're not sure if their main job is preparing people for to transfer to a four-year college and get a BA, or if their main job should be preparing people for the workforce. Many try to do both, try to be all things to all people, and they end up doing nothing well. So, what's needed? Colleges need to, this is what our report, it's a 100-page report. The message, you need a reboot is the big rallying cry, but then we do get into the details. Colleges need to identify and deploy all those exciting innovations that have been developing for the last 10 years, sort of tools and tricks, and we bring them all together kind of in one place, and I'm sure Peter and I will talk more about them. But colleges need to go beyond a reform here and a reform there. They need to embrace a new mission and a new sense of identity. Well, what is that identity? Well, our group's message was put workforce education more at the center of your mission and culture. Step up as the nation's premier provider of workforce education. Many colleges do this, and in Texas, some of them do a very good job of it, but it's often kind of defensively, apologetically. The workforce division is the redheaded stepchild on campus. We say embrace that role, own the space, step up your game in that department, and accept a new metric. This is really the important line on this slide. Accept a new metric for what you do, job placements, success measured by job placements. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean give up on that other function, that junior college function, right? Preparing students for transfer to a four-year college is still really important. A bachelor's degree in the right major, that's a really important caveat, is a great ticket to the middle class. And community colleges need to do a much better job of preparing people to transfer. But look at the numbers. I mean, this is the tragic slide, the criminal slide. 80%, roughly, 77, nearly 80% of young people show up at a community college saying they want to transfer and get a four-year degree, and only 13% make it. So, sure, community college, work harder, do a better job of preparing students for four-year schools, but please make sure that even those students leave your institution with workplace skills, business communications, business math, employability skills, job search skills, some familiarity with the labor market and their career interests. So I'm probably running out of time, but you can't talk about community colleges without saying a little more about this. Community college's hidden asset is the non-credit division. Many of you probably know it's a separate division, funded and administered separately. Nationwide, there are about as many students, we don't know exactly, but about as many students in non-credit programs as credit. The non-credit side is not accountable to faculty or accreditors. And that has its challenges. You have to work on quality control, find other means. But the point is it makes it much more nimble and responsive to the labor market and to employers. If I'm Tamar's Widgets and I show up at the community college and I ask the credit side, when can you set up a program for me? It depends on the state, but it's anywhere from 9 months to 2 years usually. If I go to the non-credit side, they usually say this week, next week, how do you want it to go? What should it be like? And the point is colleges need to, big part of our report is that the colleges need to lift up their non-credit divisions, use them, take advantage of them, but at the same time, and this is part of that same balancing act, right? The balancing act they do with transfer, colleges need to build better bridges for students between the non-credit division and the credit division, because many students want a job now. They want a job that they can prepare for with a short non-credit job-focused program, but later they might want to move up on the job and they may want to come back and get a degree, and they shouldn't have to retake courses or relearn skills or pay again for something they already learned once. So this is my last slide, and I've saved the best, well, maybe at least the most important for last, because this is where business and industry come in. And the bottom line here, I think you all know this, you can't do job-focused education without the people who know the jobs. That is like a manufacturer creating a machine part without knowing about what the specs for the rest of the machine. My other metaphor, it's like a pitcher. You can have the best fastball in the world and the best, in a college case, the best instructional and advisory capacity. But if you don't know what you're aiming for, it's going to be a wild pitch. And the point is, this is the difference between, the old kind of question, not very high quality vocational education and the new upskilling. The secret sauce is labor market alignment. And for labor market alignment, you need employers. But and this is the rub, and this is what this slide is about, it's not always easy for community colleges and employers to build the kinds of relationships they need. Educators are from Mars. Well, really, employers are from Mars. I think educators are from Venus. Different languages, different cultures, different sense of time. And this puts a responsibility on both sides to work harder on building the relationships, but it puts that both sides includes business and industry. Employers need to learn to talk and explain their labor needs better. They don't always know how to do that. They need to put time into their partnerships with community colleges and other training providers. And they need to be honest and communicate with the colleges. When the graduates they hire have the skills the colleges need to know, but when the graduates don't have skills, the colleges really need to know. So there's a lot more to say about all that, but I'm going to trust Peter to take us through it and get us to the important questions. And in the meantime, if you're interested in digging deeper, reading the report, you can find it here. Let's see, opportunityamericaonline.org/indispensable.
No, thank you, Tamar. And once again, that's very informative. And it's also at some level provocative. And, you know, I want to remind folks, please submit questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen so we can engage with Tamar. And I want to get to this point that you were just ending on, Tamar, which is one of the things we've learned in the time we've had UpSkill Houston up and running is that this collaborative table we've built is exactly what you were getting at, is how do you help people translate what each other is telling folks, whether it's the educational system or the K through 12 system or the community-based organizations or employers, is that, to your point, they all talk different languages. And there needs to be someone that's helping to facilitate that because they quickly talk past each other. And that's one of the things we've learned, and we believe that's you know, a critical piece to this. And then to your other point, you know, when we rolled forward our labor market information, we need low skilled, middle skilled, high skilled, but to your point, it's changing quickly and we need to be thinking about how are we going to actually move people in essence up the escalator. Otherwise they're going to be on a flat sidewalk going forward. And so, you know, I think those are some of the things that I took away. And so we'll make sure we put the link in the chat, as well as we will actually make it available when we send out the link to this recording. So available. So one of the things that, you know, I really want to get into and probe into is this whole notion of, you know, kind of credentials that have labor market value. And I think you did a really good job in the report of how do you take kind of those academic programs and ensure that there are workplace skills embedded in that, but then how do you take some of the skills that the academic side has that are necessary, that I think you would say are foundational or soft or essential, like problem solving and, you know, project management, and embed those on the workforce side as well. So I'd like you to kind of go a little more into that and tell us a little more about how you create labor market value.
Great question, because that is the hard work that has to be done at the college, right? And some colleges are doing it, have done it, but I think it is in some ways the next frontier, because it probably involves rethinking the programs, right? I mean, when you just, you know, let's start on the workforce side. You know, it used to be that the technical skill was enough. You know, the point of the future of work is it's pushing problem solving way down that scale of the job ladder. You know, it used to be the boss was the problem solver. Not anymore. Everybody's a problem solver. Everybody's in a team. Everybody has to communicate. And so, you know, welding, you don't learn how to communicate or be in a team or problem solve. And it's a challenge. You can't, and it's, you know, I learned problem solving by, you know, writing papers about Shakespeare. We're not going to ask the welding student to do that. How are we going to teach the welding student problem solving and critical thinking? And that's a challenge for the programs to rethink and think, you know, every program, in my view, no matter how short, should have some teamwork, some problem solving, some communication. And, you know, I have a program I like a lot, the Federation for Advanced Manufacturing Education. It's an apprenticeship for manufacturing techs. They're a third technical skills, a third sort of show up on time skills, and a third problem solving, critical thinking skills. And they braid them. You learn your communication by standing at a whiteboard on a factory floor giving a presentation. And that's, you got to rethink the curriculum to get to that. And the same on the liberal arts side, you know, I graduated from, you know, an Ivy League college. I didn't have a clue like how to write a business memo or, you know, anything about like this, you know, I didn't know the difference between profit and loss, I don't think, let alone, you know, statistics or digital or what have you. And, you know, I didn't have really any idea about what the world of work was like. And we need to make sure that everybody gets some of that. And whether that happens in separate programs, here's your workforce skills program, or whether we braid it into what they're doing. But this is the job for colleges and for curricular reform. And it's not easy. And it's not easy to get to that level of reform. You know, curriculum is pretty sacrosanct stuff. And faculty think that they, you know, that they know how to teach, you know, you know, that they know how to teach it. They invented Greek history, you know, not only do they know how to teach it better.
No, and I think that was one of the things that I saw in the report as well. And, you know, I think Gallup surveys across the world, and the number one thing that stands above anything else that people care about is getting a good job for themselves and a good job for their kids. And education is the enabler to do that. And so how do we help, you know, education continue to do all the good things that it does, but also remember that at the end of the day, people are going to get a good job, however it's defined.
Yep. Now, one of my favorite systems in New York, the motto is, you know, we're creating global citizens. And, you know, my friend who's the president there, he says, you know, I don't know a single student on my campus that's here to be a global citizen. And it's, you know, it is a challenge for educators because they think of themselves as teaching people how to think and teaching people about the life of the mind and teach, you know, and they see themselves as university professors, even at community colleges, but that's not what people are there for. And you got to figure out how to do both.
And you know, this whole notion of kind of the skills, and I think as we did our work and would like to kind of get your read on it, is we looked at kind of three broad categories of skills, kind of this essential, soft, you know, transferable across multiple things. The whole thing that's shown up now is the digital skills because of automation and technology and the need to work alongside of it. And then really kind of the occupational and technical skills. Yeah. Is that a helpful way for us to be thinking about it?
Yeah, I think that's a great way. I mean, I divide it a little bit differently. I do distinguish between the sort of show up on, Tom Friedman says show up, stand up, shut up skills, you know, the sort of work ethic skills and the problem solving, critical thinking, communication, sort of higher order soft skills and more rudimentary. But I think the digital is key, and I guess I'm not sure which. I guess it probably goes in. I'm not sure. Probably the higher order, and then technical. So I mean, I think, you know, there was always different ways to cut up the pie, but I think.
And you know, as you brought folks together, there's a question in the Q&A, which is, what do you see or have learned about the levels of digital literacy needed in either the various workforce areas or in the levels of operation in a particular area?
Yeah,
I don't know whether that came
up. And I'm not a labor market expert. I mean, I try, I pretend, I play one on TV, so to speak, but I mean, that's not, I can't really give you chapter and verse with data, but I mean, I think there's no question, you know, the digital revolution has, even before COVID, had crept into every sector of the economy. I mean, you go to farms and people need to have digital literacy to operate the machinery. And, you know, now with COVID, it's just like the line has gone off the chart. I mean, everything is going to get more digital, and it's going to continue. I mean, this happens in downturns, right? The automation, innovation always happens in downturns, and this is, we are in the future of work. We are, you know, if the metaphor is the frog in the boiling water, the water's boiling now, and it's going to go on boiling for quite a while, and jobs are going to change.
You know, and there's another question in here, you know, and it's probably a dialogue between you and me, which is, can you discuss the role between community colleges and employers within a community? Once a student has completed a skills program, what is the link pipeline to employment, and does a group like GHP have a role to play there? And I can get to that part of it, but I'd be interested in kind of what you were hearing from that broad category of folks.
So I used to spend a lot of time visiting community colleges. Now I spend a lot of time talking to community colleges. And employer engagement is one of those words. Again, let's remember, we're back in the 1970s in Silicon Valley. You know, we have this idea of the cell phone, but we don't really have one yet. And, you know, employer engagement, my metaphor there is that in English, we have one word for snow. There's some Eskimo nations that have 26 words for snow. And employer engagement is a huge bucket that varies enormously from, literally, I heard somebody say once, oh, have a new employer partner. I sat next to an HVAC guy at the Rotary yesterday, to the employer partner. I mean, they didn't even laugh. They didn't realize how silly that was. To the employer partner that designed the program with you, lends the instructor, guarantees to hire the person, calls you every day and says, you know, the curriculum is not right. They don't know how to do the machine. And it's the whole spectrum in between. They can all be useful. I mean, that HVAC guy might tell you something about the HVAC trend that you didn't know. You know, maybe you hadn't heard of HEPA filters, and he says, oh, we need HEPA filters now, and you take it back and you do something about it. But the most valuable are the ones at the other end, where you're really working closely, you're really co-designing the program. There's really a job, or at least an interview, waiting at the end of the program, big motivator for people. And then the company knows they're going to hire from there, and then they're going to, when it doesn't work, they're going to complain.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the important thing. Those tough conversations are so important. Just a nice partnership, but you can't like talk about it. You know, marriage where you can't explore your differences. So there's a whole range of ways to engage, but you know, and you have to figure out which one you're ready for and which one you have the resources and the bandwidth for and need, and then do the best you can at your level. And there's no question there's a role for intermediaries like UpSkill.
Yeah, no, and I think that to that point, that's one of the reasons, you know, the partnership created the effort was, you know, we shouldn't just leave it to the colleges to figure out how to partner with employers and like, who can I go talk to? Is like, how do you create this collective table? Yeah. And that's really the role that we've tried to play, but also then how do we ensure to your point, the employer's voice is really heard and deepens the engagement in a different way? Because, you know, everyone has a requirement to have an advisory committee. And I think that is a very uneven kind of approach, because you can have advisory committees that are to the point where you roll up your sleeves and you're like, when you talk about doing spreadsheets, is it a business spreadsheet or is it just general spreadsheets? It's like, you know, if you're going to do this, think about, you know, and how do you engage in kind of the curriculum that really is going to meet the employer's needs, as opposed to here's what we're doing and just want you, you know, we convene you twice a year and thank you very much for what you've done. And so I think,
yeah, I think a lot is about who talks at the meeting. You know, it's when you go, when it's, I remember an employer once came out of a meeting and he said, well, you know, they just talked at me for 50 minutes. And at the end I said, well, where's the part that we get to talk? And, you know, and in the cases that we, you know, the cases that need some improvement, let's say, the faculty talk for 50 minutes and then the employers get to talk for, you know, give a little bit of feedback, and the faculty don't really listen. You know, they've already got their program. Or, you know, it's that you can have any color you want as long as it's black. You know, we have a program and, you know, I hope it meets your needs. So I think who's doing the talking, and I really go back to the tough conversations, you know, and the metaphor is a marriage. If you can't say what's wrong, you're not going to get very far, you know, in a nice way, and you have to figure out how to do it and without disrupting the partnership, but there has to be real back and forth.
yeah, and we have, you know, a chancellor here who talks about her own journey where she's like, I basically said, I want to hear the good, bad, and ugly. And I really do want to hear the ugly because, you know, she's committed to ensuring that, you know, the work gets done. And I think that's the kind of thing where you've got to create the, in essence, psychologically safe space for people to have those conversations. Yeah. And go ahead.
Well, there's an onus on the employer too, right? So it's easy to blame the faculty, I often do, or the college administrators, but employers, you know, they come to the table, they're as much speaking their own language that the colleges don't understand. You know, the employers get to the table and it's all educatees or whatever, but to the colleges, the employers are just as hard to read. Yeah. And employers often don't know how to talk about the skills they need. I mean, you know this better than I because you do the translating. That's something employers need to learn to do, and if they want these workers, they need to put in the time and engage.
No, and I think that's, you know, there's a question in here about how can business leaders get involved to support this effort, and I'm just going to do a shameless plug that UpSkill Houston is that venue to help do that. And so Nanette, you can reach out to me at pbeard@houston.org or upskill@houston.org, and we'll, you know, bring you into kind of what we've been working on. And so, you know, it is that point, because employers are also get a little timid as like, can I actually say something, because they're afraid to offend. But I do think that there's a whole conversation about how do you have that conversation effectively.
Well, if they were making parts for you, you would complain.
Yeah.
If the part didn't fit, if it wasn't, the specs weren't, to the right tolerance, you would say the specs aren't, this part doesn't work for me. So you got to do that about your workers too. They're more important.
Well, and that's how we've approached it, which is this is fundamentally a supply chain issue.
Yeah,
There are two users of the folks that sit in between the employer. There's the individual that's trying to get to the employer, and then the employer, to your point, knows the specs that they need to have in that individual. And how do you tell the supplier, like, I need that?
And this isn't bad for the students. This is good for the students. They're going to get good jobs. Like, we're not betraying anyone or turning something into a commercial relationship that shouldn't be.
So one of the other questions here are, from your research, what are some of the barriers preventing community colleges from embracing this new role, kind of as career-focused education providers?
Yeah, so that's a fraught question, good question. I mean, so many of them feel that so many of them feel that their job is to be a sort of a mini university, or to please the university, to prepare people for the university. And again, it's easy to make fun of. It's a noble calling. These people think of themselves as higher educators. That's good. But it does often make them lead them to, think that workforce is sort of dirty. And we don't do that. We train people to think about Plato or whatever, think about big ideas, or be global citizens or whatever. That's one problem. The other problem is that in many colleges, they're great, and especially Texas. I mean, San Jac, Brazosport, a lot of your colleges are great workforce engines, but often the workforce side is sort of still, even as good as it is, on the campus, it's still kind of the redheaded stepchild. And the kind of, when you say college, people think college. And it's just hard to embrace the role as, and that's what we were trying to do in our report, was sort of create the space for those people to sort of rise up and be more prominent on the campus and have more of a role at the campus and embrace that mission. Because, I mean, we have four-year colleges, and lots of people go to four-year colleges now, and we don't have a post-secondary training provider, and we need one. And so it is difficult. And no matter what, every college in America now almost knows how to talk the talk. They all know how to talk about employer engagement. They all know how to talk about stackable credentials. They all know how to say, prepare people for jobs. Many of them don't even know really what it means yet. And so there's both kind of, I won't say willful resistance, but there's sort of a different identity. There's a kind of a little bit of a power struggle, and then there's sort of ignorance of what really it is that a transformation would be like. And I think all those things have to be overcome, but a lot of colleges are, and that's the exciting news.
No, and I think to your point, there's movement, and I noticed that part of the folks that you had on it, you had Texas State Technical College, I think, as part of your advisory board, which, as we know, is a pay for performance, which begins to align incentives in a very different way. And I don't know if you want to have a brief comment about that.
We love TSTC, and we love that formula, and I tout that formula in all 50 states. I haven't gotten anybody else to do it yet, but.
But I also think that's one of the issues that we confront here in, Texas, is how the colleges are currently funded is just it's like a landmine to try to go in there, and a minefield in order of what we're going to have to try to do to kind of reform that. And
although Texas is better than many states. I mean, I gave a lot of credit to Harrison Keller for using his GEAR money, part of the CARES Act, for short workforce programs. I mean, he did a better job than really any state in the country. Florida also did a good job, but so you have a good culture for it. I mean, a lot of cultures, in New York, they spent the money on K through 12. I mean, K through 12 is nice, but, and important. Yes, the funding is key, but you guys you have a lot to work with. You have, I mean, the fact that you already have the performance-based funding formula for TSTC, the fact that, the head of the higher ed system knows how important workforce is, the fact that you have a lot of colleges that are already really good at it. I mean, I think of you as kind of leader among states in the field. Yes, we need to go further, and yes, we need to fix federal funding so that you can use your Pell Grant for a short workforce program, but that's my day job.
So, I mean, one of the things that I really appreciated, and it shows up in the work that we think about as our next strategy, which is this whole area of helping individuals navigate careers. And I thought that was like, I think you were kind of hinting at it in your presentation, which is like, how do you help people look for those, if they're even going to transfer, pick the right programs so that they articulate into a program that's going to have market value. Do you want to share a little bit about kind of this
Well,
whole career navigation space?
Just think about, any 18-year-old, that is not, they want a job out of life, but that's, they think they're going to be a basketball player or work in Hollywood, or I don't know what kids want these days, but it's not, they don't think realistically about the labor market. And displaced adults, people who lose their job, who've been working somewhere for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, they know even less about the labor market. They know the labor market where they got their job 20 years ago. And they don't know how to look for job skills anymore. They don't know how to think about how do the skills I have correlate with some job that might actually be available. So learners are ignorant about the job market and about what they're aiming for, and they need a lot of help. And they don't get very much help. And particularly, they don't get very much help usually in the workforce system, although that's what the workforce system is supposed to be helping them with. And they don't get that much help at community colleges. And I had a conversation a few weeks ago with a group of young people in New York, 3 or 4, I think there were 4 of them, people of color, 20s, 30s, 40s, who'd gotten to the City University of New York, an accomplishment in itself, gotten degrees and still couldn't get a job. And what they told me about was we just didn't know what to study. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know where to go. And one said to me, well, for one semester, I had someone who really helped me. And she not only helped me understand what job I wanted, but she sat with me and she said, well, you have to take this course. And not only that, but when you go to this course, you're getting this out of it. This is why you're there. This is what you're trying to learn. People need a lot of help. I mean, they don't know what they're learning or why they're learning it. And there's a lot of work to be done. It's one of those important frontiers, and it's great work that you all are doing to try to think about what's the locus of that navigational help. And I think it's probably everywhere, who offers it, probably everywhere. And then what does it consist of, and who should do it, and how do you deliver it, and who pays for it?
Well, and also, how do you do the handoff when you move from a system to another system? And absolutely. I think to this point, it just doesn't stop. Well, I got them to the end of my pipeline and it's up to the next one. But we've got to figure out, in a conversation I was having with kind of the CEO of United Way as she was retiring, was like, we really need to support individuals that are coming to community-based organizations probably for 3 years, both to kind of help them find that path, but then also knock down the barriers that they're going to confront as they're trying to kind of work their way through this.
But it also goes to the metric, right? I mean,
yeah.
if colleges got their money for placing people in jobs instead of like butts and seats for 2 years, they would do a much better job of helping them navigate the way to a job.
Well, and you and I talked about this yesterday. This is what I like about Jobs for America's Graduates. That career specialist is not only helping someone get to the high school, the diploma for high school. It's like they have a year responsibility beyond that to ensure that their first year in college or their first year in work is successful, which I think is kind of a helpful kind of orientation for us to think about this. So one of the questions in the chat is really, and this is focused kind of on veterans and DoD kind of stuff. So has there been any thought to leveraging the veteran community more? This group has DoD funded community college tuition assistance available at or near bases around the country, but may be headed home to an industry that doesn't have a presence near the current base. For example, process technology outside of Texas. Instead, they don't have a chance to start industry specific until they get to Texas and now have to draw on GI Bill or may join the workforce in a less high potential career, especially with their tech and leadership experience. To this point, they've got other skills that we've got to crosswalk them into the civilian workforce.
Yeah, super interesting question. I mean, I think there's a lot of organizations and people and thinkers who focus on veterans. I don't think they're sort of neglected. I think we're all aware that it's a problem. I think of them in the same category as other displaced workers. The problem is you don't want them to fall in that gulch between the two things, because once you're sort of unemployed for a while or searching for a while, your skills the skills you have start to go stale. So how do we pretty quickly connect them to a job and upskill them once they're in the job? I think that's that's my kind of theoretical approach to it. How to get them to move to the right place is interesting. I mean, I think my understanding is a lot of bases do sort of workforce orientation and training before they let people go. And maybe the challenge for the energy industry is to do a little more of that in places that you don't, places where there are veterans.
Yeah.
Because the more they learn before they actually are, decommissioned or whatever it's formally called, that they're great jobs in Texas, and it wouldn't be that hard to translate the skills you've got, that cross that gulf between the skills you've got and the skills that are needed. Then you're not going to kind of lose them in the haystack. They're going to go right from the end of one pipeline to your pipeline.
Well, and we have a really good organization here in Houston called Next Stop, and it really is this notion. And despite the fact that Houston really doesn't have a military base, that it reaches out to the ones in Texas and other places to actually create the pipeline, but also, how do you attract folks, provide a mentor, and then have almost an employer engagement arm that is engaging with employers, saying, here's how you can, take advantage of veterans and returning service members. And so it's a really good effort to kind of think to this point, how do you create this pipeline in a different way? And I think part of it is, how do you help veterans also find that ability to get those technical skills that they're going to need in order to get to that other pipeline?
Yeah, I think ultimately, and I think it's about government funding incentives, right? Ultimately, the best answer would be to hire them as quickly as possible and then train them on the job, so many sort of apprenticeships,
Yep.
not, 4 years necessarily or whatever, but on the job, get them in that job right away, so they know why they're learning it, and they care, and they're getting some pay, even maybe training wage. That would be sort of ideal in my view for all dislocated workers, really. And that's a policy incentive thing. We need to create that.
Yeah. And we started with this notion that employer leadership is critical not only for the curriculum, but I also think, and there's some questions that touch on this in the Q&A, which is, what are the role employers should be playing to help with kind of the career navigation piece to this? Because to the point we were talking about, things are changing so quickly. They've got to be able to help not only attract folks to consider these, but also recognize how do you help individuals navigate to the employer?
Well, it starts with articulating the skills that you need, right? And again, that is not easy. I've been in so many rooms where people say to employers, well, what skills do you need? And they sort of say fog a mirror, or they say use the Bridgeport machine, or, just something that doesn't really help you figure out what to train them in. So it does start with articulating skills. Then there are things like career exposure, job shadowing, work-based learning is super important and hard to engage employers around. How is a kid going to know whether they want to work in energy if they don't like, I don't know, getting greasy or whatever, or they don't like, how are they going to
Or putting your hand in someone's mouth.
Right, exactly. Blood, I don't like the sight of blood. I want to be a nurse, but I never was around blood. So, career exposure, internship, explaining those skills, making sure that when you explain the skills, you're explaining them to the right people in the room, right? The faculty need to understand, this is part of the college's job, but the faculty need to understand them, but the guidance and career people need to understand them as well. I'm a big fan of having career coaches, guidance, whatever, in the institution that's people out of industry. Lend some of your people to the college to be the career coaches, both to help them figure out what jobs to get, but also that stuff about like, what am I supposed to be getting out of this course? That should be a person from industry.
Yeah, and it probably even needs to go further back because
Absolutely.
Here in Texas, we've got people picking endorsements in grade 7 and 8 that are intended to kind of help not necessarily be majors, but begin the beginnings of a pathway. But we probably need employers even further back to actually expose that so people are making more informed choices.
Middle school and exposure, maybe even a little before.
And we have a great program going on right now that came out of Atlanta and Junior Achievement in Atlanta called 3DE, where employers are partnering with school districts to, in essence, do kind of case study, project-based 6-week efforts where the employer is actually helping to teach it back in the school district, which is part of that exposure, I think, is going to be critically important.
Yep. Well, we see wonderful programs in middle schools where the businesses create the problem. Some guy, so Tamar's widgets, this is your month to give us a problem. The students have project-based learning. They learn problem solving. And then at the end, the employers come and judge the little projects they create, or does it solve the problem? I mean, that's, but it's engagement, right? This is time, this is bandwidth, this is somebody at your company. This doesn't happen, by accident.
No, and we had someone from Parker Dewey also come in, and this whole idea of micro internships, which are project-based, could be done in 10 to 20 hours, I think is another way to kind of, in a community college or a college setting, help people begin to kind of peak before they buy, but also help embed those skills. There's a question in here about kind of, can you speak about community colleges' focus on dual credit? Is that helping or hurting potential?
That's super important. Good question. Thank you. So many young people get lost between high school and post-secondary. They're 18 years old. They don't know where to go. They need money, and the easiest job is something dad is doing or mom is doing that isn't a very, that's a low skilled, low demand, no career path job. And so these programs, and these are about 10 years old. This is one of the most interesting sort of kinds of innovation in work, career preparation, are bridge programs that get you from high school to college. And dual enrollment is super important. A third of American high school students take some college credit course in high school. That's a great number. We've accomplished a lot. Not every college has it robustly, and not every state has it as robustly as it should, but it's super important and needs to be more of it, really important.
I'm kind of trying to get through kind of these various questions. There's a great question in here kind of related to the community college's role with respect to kind of the prison system. And I know we've got colleges that are doing work in the prison system, and it's the Texas prison system has a decent program where HVAC, cable fiber, CAD drafting, truck driving, et cetera, is created with the local manufacturers and job providers in the Houston area, and I assume across Texas. Ex-offenders come out with an assigned job. Do you see community college systems in Texas doing the same? Also, what programs for women do we need to polish up to be able to put into the prison education training and then get them into the Wyndham school system, which is the prison school system?
Yeah, that sounds, I don't know anything about it, but it sounds like a really good idea. This is a great conversation because people know sort of corners of this landscape I'm not too familiar with. Of course, great idea. And it's the same idea as the military, right? You want to get to them when they're, in their last 6 months or whatever it is. So you're training them so they don't get lost between, that there's not a leaky pipeline. So that they start to get the idea of the job they want. They start to get the training in prison. They know there's a job waiting. I can't emphasize enough how much that's a motivator for adults learning things. Like just, go to class because you might learn something and they'll be good for you someday. People just don't, people don't have time for that. If you do this and you do it well and you do it right, at the end, you are going to get hired when you get out. And yes, we need that, and we need it for women. And I'm excited to hear that there's a good program to model.
Well, and I think to your point and where we were talking before, this is where the business education partnership becomes even more critical, so that a teacher, whether it's in prison or not, is saying, to your point, what you're getting out of this class should be able to help you do these things in a work setting, whether it's problem solving or being able to present. You're going to have to present and argue or whatever, and you're going to have to do data analytics, so you better know how to use a spreadsheet. And that's why we're teaching these things. And so I think,
I don't know where the college, does this become under contract training? There's a lot about what are going to be the incentives for the college to do this kind of stuff, and how does it work for them? But the other piece we aren't talking about, which I become mindful of as we think about this, is the workforce system, right? Community colleges and the workforce system, in some places they work amazingly well together, and in some places they don't work together. And you've got basically two silos, and they're trying to do sort of the same thing, and they're both doing it poorly, and we're spending taxpayer money twice. This is a place where I would think the workforce system, you are the intermediary, but the workforce system can also be, how do we help make sure these people make that transition, don't get locked down, there isn't a leaky pipeline.
So I know we're coming up kind of toward the end of the session, and I should have scheduled it for like 4 hours and we'd be wonderful. No, but you've been wonderful. But, one of the things I wanted to kind of ask you, in light of the pandemic, are there one or two approaches that we should be thinking about here in Houston, as we think about kind of, the destruction that's gone on in the economy, and the fact that, people's skills atrophy, the longer they're out of this system, And are there, one or two approaches that you would kind of highlight to us as we think about how we support individuals and families during what I suspect is going to be a long, long recovery? Because not only do we have the pandemic, we've got low energy prices.
That's the hardest question. That's the question we as the nation face. And it's not just going to be about COVID and recovery from COVID, because jobs are going to change so much now. And it's not just energy, all jobs are going to change. This, name a job. It's going to be, it's different now than it was 9 months ago, and it's going to be different in another 9 months. And we're not good as a country at training dislocated workers. I mean, I've been looking at the literature recently. I mean, you can't find a good study that says we know how to do it. And it's partly because in the past, the navigation was missing. It's partly because in the past, the programs didn't have good connections with employers. It's partly, all those innovations that we've that have developed in the last 10 years have not really been applied to dislocated workers yet. So there's a lot of work to be done. But I think, as if I was on the front lines as you are, and you do a great job on the front lines, I think it is about making sure they don't spend too much time in that, in the no man's land, that they go as quickly, that as soon as they, before they're laid off, right? We start to do skills assessment. We start to figure out what skills they already bring to the table. Don't train from a blank slate. Take the skills they have, match it to the existing job that has the closest skills, and figure out what few skills you need to teach them to bridge that gap, and try to do it again. And this is a funding and incentive problem, and you need employers who are sort of forward looking, but ideally you would get them hired, and again, maybe at a training wage, but then you would train them once they were hired. So they wouldn't spend time out of the labor force. They wouldn't spend time, getting their skills stale, letting their skills go stale. So, I think it's the navigational piece, it's the skills assessment piece, and it's the, don't let them, don't let them fall out of the system.
Because it sounds like, this notion of we should be looking for career adjacencies where there's a core set of skills that become a foundation, and then what's the gap to help them to get to a bridge space that then may lead to kind of the real opportunity for them. Because I think it is going to be about that whole approach of how do we actually get people, back to work and stabilize to then figure out, let's get them to the next, the better job. I can't thank you enough, but at the same point, I know you're doing some work and survey work, and I don't know if you want to kind of talk about some information that's probably going to come later next year in terms of what you're going to learn from community colleges. Then we'll kind of close it out.
That's a great opportunity, and really the thanks go the other way. I mean, this is a great opportunity for me, and talking to you, much more about all these topics than me. So this is I should be interviewing you. The hat's on the wrong head or whatever. I did my community college work in the wrong order. We did the normative part of the project first, and now we're doing the fact finding. You usually do it the other way around. So we wrote this big normative paper saying what community colleges should do. Now we're trying to figure out what community colleges actually are doing in the workforce space. And the point is, we know there's all this exciting innovation. We know everybody, as I said, can kind of talk the talk, but we don't really know how deep it's going. Who's got good relationships with employers? How many schools really do? How many schools really are putting a focus on workforce? How many schools, what's going on in that black box of non-credit where they don't report any data? So we have a national survey in the field, and if I wasn't on this call, I would be madly trying to get more people to fill it out because we're coming to the deadline. We're trying to get all 1,200 two-year institutions in America to respond to a pretty lengthy survey of telling us about, it's not sort of how was your Instacart driver, it's Instacart guy, it's what's the data on how many students are doing this and how many students are doing that, and what certifications do you embed, and that. And we're up to about 50% of colleges are either started it or finished it. So we're kind of excited. That's a good rate for a survey, but we're hoping that in a few, early next year, early next spring, not totally clear, we'll have a really much better picture of what's going on at community colleges. And we think that's a great tool for it's not just sort of nifty research project, but it's a great tool for the colleges, when they learn, well, and they'll get individualized reports back when they learn, well, we're embedding certifications in 3% of our programs, but the national norm is 15, we better up our game. It's a great tool for the state legislature when they see, well, these institutions are putting people back to work. You know, all we think about is the crummy graduation rates. Well, actually, forget the graduation rates. Look how good a job they're doing training people for the workforce. That should be good for the system, helpful for policy, and eventually, I hope, helpful for federal policy. You know, let's get those darn Pell Grants, you know, rearranged, reformed so that you can use them in your welding course.
So we're going to bring you back once you have that information, because I'm sure it's going to be just insightful. Once again, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us here in Houston. You are always welcome. And, you know, obviously, as you know, I respect the great work that Opportunity America is doing across the board, and we'll continue to support, you know, anything we can to help you in Washington. As our audience will see on their screens, we've listed important resources we discussed today. Thank you to our audience for participating in the forum series. And also thank you to our gold and silver underwriters. Next week on December 7th, the UpSkill Works Forum will focus on Gateway to Career Exploration and Pathways. Our guests will be Victoria Chen from Bridgeyear and Laura Brennan from Texas OnCourse. We'll share information about this forum in the chat, and we'll send you notifications via email in the coming days. Once again, thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day.